Welcome, everyone. My name is Seamus Ford. I'm Landmark's Director of Community Engagement, and I want to welcome you to another installment of the Landmark Difference Maker series. Today, our guest is Ann Rittman, and she's an educator, a writer, a filmmaker, and a human rights advocate with a passion for making a difference. With a career spanning 5 decades, Ann has lived a lifetime of service. And her commitments have ranged from impacting child trafficking, poverty, education, to the environment, and many more that I'm not going to include. We'll illustrate that during the interview. But today, Ann's going to share with us specifically really heartwarming stories about her decades-long commitment to the country in Nepal. And with that, I want to go ahead and just first welcome you, Ann.
Thanks, Seamus. It's great to be here.
Well, let's go ahead and just start with a question to kind of get a sense of you. Tell us a little bit about how your career started and the journey that led you to the bus that took you to Nepal.
What led me to Nepal specifically was back in 1972. We did a thing in those days called your world trip. So you'd save up. I saved up for a year, and with a friend, we headed off on our world trip. Now, Nepal was not in my sights at that point. I'd made a deal with this friend that, if we went away, that we would go where she wanted to go, and she said South America. So we spent a lot of time in South America and then went across to Europe. And then she had to come home, and she said, I think this is a trip you'd love. She'd been before. She said, I'm going to buy you a ticket on a bus to go to Katmandu from London. So she said, I'm not going to buy you a ticket on the hippie bus because you might get shot at the border between Afghanistan and Iran. It was a bit on the dangerous side, but we'd been through South America, so we were really up for anything, or I was. She said, I'm going to buy you a ticket on the Sundowner bus, which was Australians. So we had 40 Australians and we set off. I had no idea where Katmandu was. I just had a really great book to read, and I was just up for anything and everything. So it took about 3 to 4 months to get to Katmandu. And when I arrived, a friend had been on the hippie bus. She arrived roughly at the same time. And it was the most vivid memory of getting out of that bus, booking into a little hotel, and getting up the next morning and going down for breakfast and looking up at the Himalayas. You can't see the Himalayas from Katmandu now unless there's a decent downpour of rain because of the pollution. But it was crystal clear, just these incredible mountains hanging as a backdrop. And that was my introduction, really. I had been asked the question on the bus, what are you going to do about the beggars when you get there? And I took that question seriously. And, the guy said to me, he said, Ann, you're going to have to give money to some. If you give money to some, the rest will hate you. If you give money to no one, they'll hate you. So you've got to work out what you're going to do. So I gave it some thought and thought, I'm going to give my contribution will be to hire someone who's a beggar as my, not my PA, but my helper. So a very sweet little boy was peering around the corner of the doorway when I was having breakfast, and our eyes met, and I thought, he's my man. He was 7. Ran was his name. And he went everywhere with me, this little boy, and I had a Pentax camera. We didn't have digital cameras in those days. So he used to wear it around his neck, and people used to say to me, you can't let a beggar carry your camera around. He disappeared for hours. But I knew I could trust this kid. And so we spent 7 weeks together, Ram and I. And so when time came for me to leave, I had become very attached to him, and I said, Ram, I'm going now, but what are we going to do? What would you like to do now? And he said, Ann, I want to go to school. He used to sleep in the temple with his little friend Krishna. They'd run away from home. And I said, okay, well, let's do that. So we took Ram to a hotel, gave him a good scrub, bought him some clothes, and everything he'd need to go to school. And I found a man, a family man, businessman, in a little bar. His name was David Chowdhury, and I'd been chatting to this fellow for quite a while. So I went and found David, and I said, if I send some money, would you make sure this kid gets into a school? And he said, yes, I will. And so that's what happened. So I
One of the
left.
questions, one of the questions I have, you use the word beggar, and some people might
Yeah,
relate to that as a derogatory term, but
yeah.
uh, that's the circumstance that many people live in. Uh,
Yeah, well, he did. He would have called himself a beggar. I mean, he was just a little boy that had run away from home. There weren't too many kids, but they lived on the street. And if they were going to eat, people had to give them money or food. So, yes, I don't know what other term you would use. I mean, he was a very amazing. I mean, he now has done some amazing things with his life.
well,
Like that was a
we'll come back to that in a
all
moment.
right, great.
Um, but clearly you went for the adventure and you stayed for the people. Um,
That's what happened. Yes.
yeah. Uh,
I've often wondered, Seamus, how come? Why Nepal? I can't answer that question particularly, other than I established a very I mean, I was 25 years old and I was never going to get married and have children. That was not going to be my future. So maybe it was just, here's this little boy. He didn't have any parents, and I felt that I could give him the one thing I could give him, which would be an education.
One of the things that I think when we travel, a lot of those relationships that we um, form with people are perhaps intense, but often fleeting, transient. You made a long-term commitment to someone.
Mm.
What what was it about him, or what was it about, the situation you find yourself in, that you made that kind of a commitment?
When you ask that question, my mind immediately goes to my parents, my father. My father had no education at all, and yet he became one of the greatest photo reconnaissance pilots in World War II. So I don't think that the fact that this little boy had nothing and lived in the temple and was, okay, let's say a beggar, that really had much to do with what was possible for his life. I wouldn't have articulated it like that at that point in time. All I knew was this is this little boy. Everyone was warning me about, letting him run off with my camera, but I knew I could trust him. So I think there was just an unexpected delight in establishing that relationship with that little kid. It was just not expected. I didn't plan it. I didn't go there to do that. But also, I know that education has been the route through for, say, for example, my mother, who had, a mother who had nothing, who did everything to make sure her kids had an education. So education loomed as like an access for people. And I don't know that I really thought it through, other than I wanted to leave him in good hands when I left. That was what it was to do with. And I
Uh,
trusted David Chowdhury. He was a man that I just felt I could trust.
well, that sense of commitment, in preparing for this conversation with you, I see there's three, really big thrusts to your work in Nepal.
Yeah,
One thing I want to talk about is the prevention and intervention in child trafficking.
yeah,
Uh,
that's right.
but it's also led to earthquake relief. It's also led to building a school in a rural part of the country. But let's just talk about um, the trafficking. According to the U.S. State Department, Nepali women and girls from 11 to 25 are at very high risk of trafficking.
Yeah,
unregistered migrant workers, including Nepalis who travel via the open border with India to third country destinations, are particularly vulnerable to forced labor and sex trafficking.
that's right. Yes, I was alerted to the issue of trafficking by a friend in 2004. Now, at this stage, I'd lost contact with RAM. So this friend had business. She's a businesswoman, and she was on a plane. We were both in a program, a landmark program together, the communications program. And she was on a plane, and she'd done a lot of work in India. She'd married an Indian guy, right? She read an article in Marie Claire, which was about trafficking. Anuradha laid out what was actually happening, that a lot of girls from the Dalit, or the what was commonly known as the untouchable caste, were trafficked. And they were trafficked. They were promised jobs, and then what would happen is they would be drugged, taken down by road to Mumbai, and then from there they would be kept. There is a film you can watch called The Day My God Died, which is an underground film of what actually happens to these girls. And they really, it's a shocking what happens beyond just the simple sex trafficking. When eventually they contract HIV, AIDS, which they do, many of them are killed and put through minces and sold as dog's meat. I mean, it's a horrible thing, horrible image, but it's a fact. So, she went to see Anuradha with Gillian to the institution Anuradha had put together by a German family, and it's very close to the airport. A lot of people know this place. It's called a Mighty Nepal, which means mother's house, and there are well over 100 women there who are, who've been rescued from trafficking. And I know a lot of these women personally now because we arranged a program which Kathy Elliott led, which was a transformational leadership program for the entire institution. I went over there. I mean, Karen was a businesswoman, so her thing was trade. She made sure that she sold goods that they made or sent them things, material goods. But mine was always, again, education. So by then I was, involved with landmark education as a self-expression leadership program leader as well. And I knew that the difference would be made with transformational education. So we had the entire organisation. So I lived there for 3 months and just registered them, gave them proper introductions via a translator, and they loved it. The thing that they most wanted was to learn to speak English. But one of the miracles that came out of that program, I can remember when it was over and I was in my room being taken care of, I stayed at the guest house at Mighty Nepal, was a woman called Anju. And Anju had been trafficked. She'd been rescued. She went home and then she was raped daily by her uncle. Now, she could barely walk. She was incapacitated, really. And Nepalese houses are like the mountains. They go up 5 to 6 stories and staircases all the way up. And Anju could never walk down. She had to be helped down. Now, the morning after the program, because I used to teach them painting and English, just, because that's what they enjoyed as well. And I hear a thumping on my door, like, Auntie, they call me Auntie. I opened the door and here's Anju. She'd walked down from the top floor, no help, with her paintbrushes. And she said to me, Auntie, painting. I said, Anju, it's 7 o'clock in the morning. Painting, she goes. One thing I know about the Nepalese, if they want something, they will request it over and over and over until one either surrenders or, there's only one answer, surrender. But I'll never forget that. Just this incredible, well, it was a physical transformation for this woman, Anju.
Well, a lot of people that'll be watching this interview are familiar with the forum, having participated in them for themselves, and
Yeah,
um, no doubt had a profound personal transformation and expansion of
yeah.
what's possible. What is that? What is, if you can say, what is that like for somebody under the circumstances of the women who've escaped trafficking like?
I spoke to a number of the women. In fact, I did some interviews with them, similar to what you and I are doing now. A lot of them became very outspoken, like they shared things that they hitherto hadn't shared. So it opened up the possibility of, letting people know, tell the truth about their lives. A lot of the women went on to become border guards, like they had developed a real commitment to making a difference to other women.
Can you say a little bit specifically? It's border guard is not necessarily what people think. This is actually border guards for the specific
Was
purpose.
specifically, yeah, they could, because they'd had the experience of being kidnapped, they knew they could sense what was happening and who was, a suspicious kind of character. No matter they could just pick it. So a lot of the women would go down and they'd do periods of time on the borders and check through the buses
Mm.
of, say girls that were being taken over the border, had been promised a job, say in a carpet factory or something, and these girls would take them off the bus. So they intervened. They basically intervened.
That's an extraordinary sense of agency after what they've been through. Be able to directly
Absolutely.
interact with. Wow.
They're very, when you meet the women, they're very vibrant women. Like we talk about vibrancy, they don't appear to carry any resentment. Now, it could be there is just a desire to live a greater life. That's my experience of the Nepalese, the women as well. And I spent a lot of time. A friend of mine, Ray, and another friend, Gillian, we spent 6 weeks in the hospice at night in Nepal, painting a mural that went for, we figured about 600 feet in the end, this thing, giant elephants and snow leopards with the women. It's just, and they loved it. There was just this energy there. Mm.
Well, you're an artist, and
Yes, I'm an artist.
you're in front of your some of your artwork right now.
I brought in my koala. I had a very large rhino that Seamus liked, but it was too big.
Too big to bring to the local library where you are. Uh, but how does art facilitate making a difference in the areas you care about?
Well, I think the painting of this mural, because it was a collective effort. See, I'm an art teacher by trade, so our first stint was at the hospice, and the women were told that the entire institution was our canvas. Anurata trusted us. And I said, leave it to us, Anurata. I mean, I could still be there painting now, Seamus, a decade later. It's just, so anyway, what we did, we got the women to paint whatever they wanted over their beds. And it seemed that they loved the painting so much that they asked us, we're about to leave to go down to the school, if we would do a mural behind the altar, which was another 60 feet. Now, we did 60 feet of mural in about 3 days. The primary thing that it did, apart from developing personal relationships with people when you're painting with them, was that we became very human to them. Like we were fellow artists working side by side, the little kids would get off the bus coming home from school and they'd belt across the thing, get put in their little paint shirts and get to work. And being an art teacher, I could guide them so they didn't mess our mural up too much, you know. So anyway, it was a background, what you'd call a deep relationship where one human being to another having fun. And that really developed the relationship of trust between the Australians, us, and mighty Nepal. And we were given access to things that other people from other countries weren't. You know, we could go anywhere, do anything. It was just, you know, we were like just part of the gang, really. But when it came to discussing education, the Landmark Forum and what was possible for, you know, the women, we were listened to.
Hmm. Now, you had a chance encounter again with Ram.
Yes, I did. That was, we were organising the very first transformational program, and that was for the organisation Mighty Nepal. I don't know, for people who've been to Katmandu, there's a part, you couldn't call it a suburb, let's say it's a place called Tamil, and it's very, very rich, touristy kind of fabulous. You can get Gurkha knives, anything. And I'm there trying to get my phone to work, and I couldn't get my phone to work. And I could feel this little hand tugging at my sleeve. And I tried to get, and I looked, and it's this little Nepalese guy, and I tried to get rid of him as politely as I could, and I couldn't. He just kept hanging on. But anyway, so finally my phone worked, and I looked at him and I said, look, I need a map to Katmandu. I just need a map. And he said, hang on a minute. He said, and he took off, and he came back with this little crumpled map. And I said, thanks. And I looked at it, and anyway, something made me take another look at this fellow, and I said, I haven't been here for 40 years, you know. And he said, 40 years ago, a woman came and she sent me to school. And I looked at him and I thought it couldn't be. And I said, how old are you? And he said, I'm 48, which was perfect maths. That's how old he would have been. And I looked at him and I said, is it really you, Ram? He said, Anne, it is me. Now, that was 40 years later. I couldn't speak. It was just time, just like it was that cliche, time stood still. It really did. And it wasn't until the next morning I said, look, Ram, I said, is there anything you need? We were walking side by side at that point. He said, money. So I gave him $10. And then I went back to my hotel and I said, I'll come back and I'll meet you here tomorrow. So I did. But I couldn't bring myself to come. I was at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I arrived back and there was a woman waiting there who turns out to be Ram's wife. I didn't realise at the time. And she said, Ram's been here since 6 o'clock this morning. And he said, if it is her, she will come. And I looked up and here's this little, because he's very tiny, and he's hurt his back. So he was sort of shuffling, but he was fast as he could. He was coming down the hill. And we went off and we had coffee together. And I apologised to him for not, because I stopped sending money because people were saying to me, he's not getting it. And I didn't check into it correctly. But it turns out David Chowdhury took over and really did make sure that Ram had an education, which Ram says saved his life. And so I apologised to Ram. I said, I'm really sorry that I neglected you for all those years. And I said, will you forgive me? And he said, yes, almost. But he did. And I said, well, what should we do now? And he said, build a school. It was that simple. So that was really how that came about. And now if I go to Nepal, I get met by Ram and his wife and his two grown children now who speak fluent English. And yes, he assisted on our Landmark Forum, Ram did. made sure that everybody, it was the middle of the monsoon, made sure that everybody got home in taxis. Everybody. It was amazing. But yeah, so that's how that happened.
So, Anne, want to look a little closer at the process of building a school. There happens to be an image right there. What are the challenges to getting an education in rural Nepal? What are the challenges children face?
Well, I think the biggest challenge really is that people need to know that education makes a difference. Doesn't matter whether you're wealthy or you're living way up in the mountains. The building of this school, it has been somewhat of a bumpy ride, but it's a symbol, and it's been of practical use from time to time. At its peak, it had around 55 students and 4 teachers. Some of them have done the Landmark Forum, and some of the village leaders have as well. And education, see, it has to be relevant. I've had no input into the education that's been provided, because in my view, they'll provide the education they want for children. All I've said to them is reading and writing will make a huge difference, to be literate, whatever you do. When we opened the school, there was a ceremony. It was a very, very serious event, and they had a big golden tent was set up. And so there were speeches that went for hours. And at one point they asked the villagers, who thinks that this school is a good thing for the village? It was the very old ladies that put their hands up to demonstrate that they thought that this was something that would be a huge benefit. Now, it has been many things as well as a school. It was a shelter during the earthquake because it was so beautifully made. It's been made with quarried rock. And we provided the money. The villagers actually built the school. Not a stone moved. It was just remained firm. What else can I say about the school? It's been used as a factory. I do know that they've had machines in there and they've made goods to sell. They do learn. It's hard, Seamus, really. Yeah.
Let me ask the question a different way. For people that grow up in a Western country where education is not only available, it's compulsory, what is an education mean to somebody, a child in rural Nepal? You mentioned the women raising their hands, voting, for there to be a school. Their opinion is informed by probably not having access to an education.
I think the biggest thing is it's a route out of a rural existence. See, the thing is that the Nepalese, even in the remote areas, they have access to the internet. They do know that there are alternative ways to live in the world apart from getting up each morning and milking the buffalo and doing the jobs that one does. They know that there is a possible other kind of life. I'm sure the internet has played a huge part there. It's also a status thing. What I noticed was the school they were very proud to have built the school, to have a school. What it means to them, I really actually don't know. A couple of my coaches from my program went over and spent quite a few weeks determining a constitution for the school, what they wanted from it. But again, it was what they wanted. I didn't engage at that level because for me, that was something for them to decide what they wanted to do with the school.
Sure.
There's prestige attached to having an education. It certainly meant that there are alternative They could go down there, like Ram and Maya, who are the village leaders. They run businesses down in Tamil themselves. And both the daughters are looking at professions, one in the fashion industry, and these are Ram's daughters. And the eldest daughter, she helped me register all the people that we registered into the Landmark Forum for Nepalese leaders. She did it. She was my translator. She was like dynamic, incredible. So, like anywhere, like any human being, if they can see that there's something other than what's predictable, it beckons. It beckons.
Hmm. In the midst of the work that you were doing in Nepal, there was an earthquake. And
Yes.
I looked it up. The 2015 earthquake was one of the worst in history at 7.8
Yeah,
on the
that's
Richter
right.
scale.
Yeah,
Well,
it was used as a refuge. I know a lot of people directly contacted me. I have direct contact with a lot of Nepalese people. So we raised some money and sent it to people who made requests for money. I mean, I saw footage of Katmandu itself, but it just was like something out of a really devastating movie. The collapse of buildings, particularly in places like Durbar Square, which is one of their big main squares, has a market there. The buildings split from top to bottom. It's just, and I know Ram and Maya lived in a tent on the oval in the middle of Kathmandu, along with a lot of other people. They were too afraid to go into the houses because their houses are made with a very lightweight terracotta brick, which you could almost snap with your hand if you needed to. So it didn't take much for a lot of those buildings to come down. Do you know something, Seamus? One thing I would like to share about the impact of an education on people who are poor. There is a man called Keda Gandahari. Keda did our landmark forum for leaders. Keda didn't have shoes until he was 9 years old. And he lived in a place called Ligligkot, about 200 kilometres out of Kathmandu. When COVID hit, the government called a lockdown. So everybody, it didn't matter who you were, you could not leave your house. Now, a lot of these people lived on $1.50 a day. So they didn't have savings, they didn't have food. And what were they going to do month after month in a lockdown situation? I mean, you shudder to think about it, really. So what he did, he wrote to me and he said, "Anne, can we raise money? I need to feed these people." He fed over 1,000 people. He formed teams. Now, he got the go-ahead from the police. How he did that, I don't know. He enrolled them. And I said, if we send you money, you have to post photographs of what you're doing every day. Photographs went up on Facebook, rows and rows and rows of bags of rice, bags of lentils, oil, gas, and they went out. Anyone who was in distress got delivered food. He kept whole families. Well, we worked out well over 1,000 people alive during that period in time. Amazing accomplishment, really. And that was a young fellow who didn't have shoes until he was 9 years old. What shoes have got to do with, I don't know, but it has to do with the level of poverty, I
Well,
guess.
I think there's also an aspect of this, which is, we were talking about this a little bit before we got started. There's a way that you relate to people and what's possible for them that is independent of whatever circumstance that you find them in.
Yes. Yes. Well, I guess, I mean, if you've had examples of that as a small child, then it just becomes the way it is. See, when I wrote the book about my dad, I was shocked at how little I knew about that man. I wished I'd known when he was alive. But, you know, 24 years old, 7 kilometres up in a plane, stripped back, the fastest plane, diving down through the clouds, being shot at for a year. And he's just been a country boy with no education. Took him out of school because he was a naughty boy. They sent him to a convent to try and straighten him out. Didn't work. So I think I've seen sufficient at all the programs I've done with Landmark to know that we scratch the surface of what's possible for each and every human being. That what people either have extraordinary circumstances that calls forth something extraordinary from them, or you have an education which allows for people to cause extraordinary circumstances. And that's the power and magic of landmark education, in my view.
So, Anne, if you were to say how your relationship with Nepal has contributed to you, how it's influenced you, how it's had you grow, how it's changed you, what would you say?
Okay, it's been the most unexpected opportunity of a lifetime to have a country that allows you to contribute to it. Like, you know, when I look at my life, it's been pretty well determined by my relationship with Nepal. And I know when I was registering people into the forum to do the leadership forum, people came and they listened. They really wanted to know what would make a difference to their country. People thought about it. They were far more connected with less comfort, more what's this life about? So I think that's how it's contributed to me. I've contributed to it, but it has contributed to me, just giving me the opportunity to allow me to contribute what I have. So it's a very unique privilege, really. It touches me as I'm speaking about it. I'm very rarely present to it, but there's such a deep level of trust for me and me.
What do you see is now needed currently in Nepal, given everything that's unfolded between COVID and the earthquake, which was not very long ago?
Well, I'd say one of the things I can see, look, I've traced the development of a number of the people who participated in that landmark forum. A lot of their participation is global. Like there are people, there's one guy, for example, the Green Revolution, he's lecturing on sustainable agriculture around the world. Meena Sharma wrote to me and she said, Anne, the Parliament has passed a bill, or they're writing into their constitution, same-sex marriage support, like it's just across the board. Anyone, it doesn't matter what kind of marriage you want to have, we support it. She said we lead the way with that. There's all manner of there's Chankapanta, he's in Japan, he's a journalist, he's deeply interested in forwarding social issues, but they are operating on a world stage. And that's come directly from participation in the Landmark Forum. I would say the biggest thing would be two things. One would be to register as many people in Nepal into the Landmark Forum and people who are leaders in Nepal. That would make a massive difference. And the other thing, and this has just come to light for me, after that forum, the one that we had in 2019, we had 6 women who are activists in rescuing women from brothels in Mumbai. They'd been acknowledged by their leader had been acknowledged by the United Nations, Churumaya. And they said, Anne, we're having a national conference, 300 women who've been trafficked. Would you come and speak? And I didn't go. I was too tired. I said, no, I'm sorry. It's always sat there as an incompletion for me. because I think if anything's going to make the difference in that issue, it would be having that community of women registered into the Landmark Forum to expand what's possible for that. It's 25% of women or people are in that category, the Dalit caste, even though it's been outlawed, the caste system, but it's still there. So that would be what I would like to do personally, is empower those women, raise the money, and have them participate. Because I think they'd cause a revolution of a kind, which is required. Because that's the issue. That's the biggest issue I see. Yeah. But looking at evidence, I mean, I have people are writing to me. I was putting together a book. I'm having a pause at the moment. I'm doing another one, but just the most extraordinary things that they're saying that they're accomplishing since they've done the forum. They're grabbing life with both hands.
Well,
So that's
Anne, I really, I really thank you for taking the time to be with us, and really the depth and scope of your commitment, keeping at it at a time in life when a lot of people have their feet up. It's really, really an inspiration to speak with you, and I really thank you.
I want to thank you, Seamus, for giving me this opportunity. It's an extraordinary opportunity. It's had me, they say life flashes before you when you die. Well, since you invited me to take part in this interview, my mind has gone every which way looking at what an incredibly remarkable life I've been lucky enough to have.